What's up, sports fans? My name is lukasweese, host of the Weesesports Chronicles podcast. We got a great episode for you this week. Next up is Kristen Shilton. She is the Toronto Maple Leafs beat reporter for TSN and TSN 1050 Radio in Toronto. In this episode, I chat with Kristen about her approach to covering the Toronto Maple Leafs, the challenges of being a reporter covering hockey during the global pandemic, as well as her sports media career, attending Syracuse University, as well as her various stops along her career before getting to TSN, as well as her advice for young journalists breaking into the industry. The Weesports Chronicles podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, so make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to today's episode with Kristen Shilton on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. All right, as I said off the top, I am pleased to be joined by Kristen Shilton. She is a Toronto Maple Leafs reporter for TSN, and she joins me today on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. Kristen, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Kristen, look, I mean, it's November. Normally you'd be on the road or covering the NHL, but now with no hockey, it must be a little strange. So I'm just curious what this has been like for you, just, having the off season being in the fall when it's normally the regular season.
Well, I mean, we kind of already had an off season in the spring. Obviously, once the NHL shut down in March, there wasn't a lot going on until about June when the players came back for phase two and then into phase three and into that short trip to the bubble that the Leafs had. And now, I mean, there's actually been quite a bit going on with the draft and free agency and a lot of that stuff throughout the fall. So it hasn't actually been too different. Now it was a lot different. I think previously when no one really knew what was going on. At this point, I'm kind of treating it a bit like the end of an off season, hoping that with that January 1st date still being a target, I'm hoping that things will begin to pick up and we'll have a chance to get back in for some sort of training camp, maybe in December, something like that. But as with anything related to the pandemic, we're just one day at a time, one step at a time. But it actually hasn't felt much like an off season, just given how much news and how much has been going on with the team prior to the last couple of weeks. So it's been pretty easy to keep busy.
You mentioned how the NHL is targeting the January 1st start date. Obviously, nothing yet confirmed as we're recording this, but one of the interesting things, Kristen, is this whole concept of a potential all-Canadian division. And I think as hockey fans here in Canada, I mean, we know the Toronto-Montreal rivalry. We know the Toronto-Ottawa rivalry, but we haven't really seen much of Toronto-Vancouver or Toronto-Edmonton. So I'm just curious, as someone who covers the Maple Leafs, what that could potentially be like for you just in terms of creating content surrounding these potentially new rivalries.
Well, I think what creates a rivalry is there has to be some sort of antagonism between the teams. And when you only play somebody twice a year, it's pretty tough to, I think, develop any kind of bad blood, so to speak, or you don't see them in the playoffs, obviously, with everything unless you make the cup finals. So it's pretty tough, I think, for those Western Conference teams to really develop any kind of a rivalry if you're not playing them very frequently. I mean, you see Montreal, you see Ottawa. How many times a year, and then there's always the potential for those big divisional matchups to really create, I think, the rivalries that we see. So if there would be a Canadian division, I mean, I suppose that could be the building blocks for future rivalries between the teams. But I think the compelling part of the storyline when it comes to a Canadian division potentially is that, Toronto fans and fans who mostly watch the Eastern Conference would actually get a chance to see more of the players that they usually are in bed, I would imagine, when those clubs are playing. I mean, you think about guys like Elias Pettersson or even Matthew Tkachuk, those guys who just players that I think are really striking in terms of their talent, but maybe don't get as much attention just because of where they play. So that to me is the exciting part of what that division or what that the all Canadian matchups could be. And then it goes vice versa. I mean, I think teams, fans on the West Coast who maybe, depending on when they're able to watch, if you're not available at 4 o'clock to turn on an East Coast game, you might not get a chance to see as much of an Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner, and maybe that's something for hockey fans to look forward to. But if assuming this is going to be a 1 year kind of deal, I don't know how much in terms of rivalry it will create, but I do think it will create some different storylines and something different to talk about. Think about all of the hours we spend dissecting the Leafs Sens, Leafs Leafs Habs and Leafs Bruins. This will just be a different opportunity to kind of dive into how the teams match up, and definitely different styles between the West Coast and the East Coast Canadian teams. So I think that would be really fun to watch.
And Kristen, I mean, I know you had a chance to, as you said earlier, cover the restart and the bubble and the return to play. And one of the big challenges, I think, for reporters is the fact that, you're not in the locker rooms. A lot of the press conferences, scrums occur over Zoom. And who knows if that'll most likely will continue to start at least 2021. So I'm just curious, just the challenges behind that you've experienced and how you've been able to sort of conquer those in terms of producing some stellar content and being able to report on the Leafs.
Yeah, I think like anything lately, it's all about adjusting your expectations, and I think you kind of have to wrap your sports. It's for everyone who's on those daily conference calls with whether it's someone like Doug Ford, whether it's someone that you're interviewing via Zoom, when it used to be that you could do it in person. It can be harder to connect. And so I think that was maybe the toughest hurdle. And we were lucky because the Leafs were very good about making players available right from the start of the league shutdown. In the spring, they did their best to get guys on Zoom calls. And so we kind of got into a rhythm a little bit of understanding what it would be like to get any kind of compelling or interesting answers from players, which it's hard because you think about there's 30-40 reporters on a call, and you're getting questions from reporters that wouldn't necessarily be in a dressing room. You get them from all over the country, all over North America. And so that does make it harder in the sense there's already a lot of bodies in Toronto and a lot of voices, but now you're bringing in even more voices from other areas and stations that wouldn't normally be involved. So challenge, just having to really speak up, and I think really get your questions in and not sit back, which, as a journalist, I think you always try to be driving the conversation as opposed to just relying on others. But it's tough because they can't get to everybody all the time. Whereas when you're in a dressing room, I mean, if one guy's getting the star treatment and everybody's over there, you can go talk to somebody else, or you could move on to another player and get some quality content as well. But that obviously doesn't exist now, and I don't think that we're going to be back to that for a bit. And I think it's a bit of a struggle for journalists who are really driven to create that different kind of content. Like there's certain, I think of myself as a beat reporter. I'm very much about the day-to-day. I do the occasional feature, but my role is about presenting the day-to-day content, whereas a feature writer or someone who's working for a different sort of news outlet, they want something very unique, and you're not going to get unique right now because every question you're asking, I might think, oh wow, that's a good note, I'm going to put that in my story. And that's in vice versa, right? Like I might have a different angle and someone else is going to jump onto that as well. And that, I think you have to kind of let go of your feelings about creating really unique content when it comes to at least the scrums. There's been opportunities. I was able to speak to Kyle Dubas one-on-one about prospects earlier. There have been chances in some instances to actually get some more unique stuff, but that's really, I think, the biggest challenge is that you're dealing with an even greater number of people who have different agendas on what they want to talk to a player about. They're steering conversations in different ways. So you have to be very structured, very prepared, very anchored into what you want to accomplish in a Zoom call. And you have to be really ready to, to get in there and ask the questions. If you only get two, which is usually the number, there's just no time to waste. So I think actually as a journalist, it's made it almost more fun to have, well, I wouldn't say more fun, but maybe it's at least a positive to take from this change in how we do our jobs, is that it keeps you on your toes. And now you've had to pivot, and I think for journalists, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, like that's a great answer, because I think, look, I mean, during scrums in normal times, the star players would get the attention, and Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, and then for a journalist that maybe is new to the beat and wants to stand out, they'd be like, oh, like you could talk to maybe a lesser known player that it isn't getting that much attention in order to get a quote. Now that can't happen just because of the nature of Zoom calls and whatnot. So I feel like from my conversations with journalists on this podcast, you're right, that this whole concept of adjusting, pivoting to find new ways to create content is vital in order to stand out, especially in Toronto, where, as you said, there's so many reporters commentating on the Leafs, and there's so many eyeballs because of the passionate fan base that is the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I think that sort of sums it up. Is just you already have a lot of there's a lot of reporters covering the team. You have a lot of news outlets that are in on it, and then now you have a lot of other people who can step into the ring and make their voices heard as well. So carving out a niche for yourself, I think, is more paramount than ever, just to continue to be able to produce the same level of work that you felt you were able to before.
Shifting gears a bit, I want to talk a bit about your career, and I find that your career path is so unique to get to where you are right now. Maybe just the first general question. I mean, was sports media always in the cards for you, Kristen, as a career path that you wanted to take?
Well, no, not really. I didn't pursue it originally as a career path. I spoke about this recently on my Twitter, just saying that the reason why I didn't originally pursue it is because I didn't see women really in the roles that I wanted. I knew that I wanted to cover hockey in Toronto. That was sort of the dream for me. But when you really broke it down, there weren't women writers necessarily. There were some women on TV. There was, I think Rosie DiMano is one of the pioneers in this town in terms of what she has been able to do in hockey reporting throughout her career. But that was more what I aspired to. I didn't really aspire to television at all. I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to write, and I just didn't see that in Toronto and really in Canada in hockey media. So I didn't pursue it originally. I was going to school to get an English degree, which I got. I thought that perhaps I would become an author or work in publishing, something a little bit more, I think, traditional. And it just worked out that, I was still so passionate about sports. It was still where my heart was. And when I got into the working world and realized, hey, I'm spending a lot more time listening to sports podcasts and writing for blog networks for free, just because I, had opinions and wanted an outlet for them. I realized that if that's what your passion is, I was 20 at the time, and I thought, 20 is too young to just decide that you're, sort of stuck in the career that you went to school for. So that really was all the motivation I needed. I didn't want to be stuck. I didn't want to be disappointed in myself in 20 years and think, man, you don't know what you might have been able to do. So that's where I moved on to a sports journalism program in a community college. I applied to Syracuse, and I went there and got my master's in sports communication. And then everything kind of snowballed from there. And I think that, I think you have to be, it's good to be lucky. And I think I've been very lucky. I also think that I worked really, really hard to make the inroads that I did. So it was a combination of those things that really pushed me further into sports media. But I think there were several off ramps. There were several times in my career where I've had to be like, is it worth it? Is the sacrifice worth it? And you end up staying on the highway. But definitely, I think there's those moments of doubt definitely along the way where I wasn't sure if I would ever really end up here.
You mentioned about not wanting to be stuck, and I think what's so fascinating about sports media is that there is no linear path to get to where you want to go, and I think that makes for really compelling stories. And you made the decision, of course, to go to Syracuse, and I've had a few Syracuse alum on the pod, and it's just, a school that's produced some of the highest quality journalists and broadcasters in North America. So I'm just curious what it was about Syracuse that really taught you, how to be, a journalist, and just giving you the reps that you needed to just build your skills and knowledge about the industry.
Well, I think the first thing that Syracuse did is from the very first day is they really drill into you that it's a very small number of people that get admitted into these programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are already at you've already accomplished something just by getting there. And why that mattered to me was that I didn't have a ton of confidence in my journalistic ability at that point. I'd only done the 8 months of the community college program. I was still very much figuring out, this is a broadcast school and I have no broadcasting experience. How is this going to go? And I think the first thing Syracuse did was they really instilled that confidence in you from the start. Like, you might not be where you want to go yet, but you're in a great place to figure it out. And I think that confidence is part of what carried me from my very first boot camp that we did there, the 6-week summer boot camp, right through until where I am now. Just remembering that, there weren't a ton of people in my program. I think there was in total about 60 of us maybe. And that's a small group for the number of applicants that they get. So Syracuse is very good about reminding you that they want excellence out of the people that they bring into the program. And I definitely carried that confidence with me throughout what was a very challenging year for me in terms of broadening my skill set. And it started with writing. I was in the magazine, newspaper, online journalism program that moved into a sports communication program, a sports communication emphasis, I should say. But part of that was they give you a very well-rounded education. I got to start in writing, and there was all kinds of crazy on-the-job type things. Like one day we were in class and they said, okay, everybody get out right now. Like, get out of the building, go outside. And they had staged a car accident where they were like, okay, all you reporters, you're working, like, this car accident just happened, go. And you had to basically report on this fake accident, but there was people you had to talk to. How were you going to do it? You had 1 hour to file a story, and those real world examples that they could do really makes you think on your feet. And I was like, wow, I had no idea at the time what kind of pressure that felt like, and I think they did a good job of preparing us for that aspect of journalism. And then the broadcasting part, I was so bad. I have no problem admitting that. I look back at the tapes of trying to do play-by-play, of trying to do just the fake sportscasts, and it's bad, and I had to be bad, and I got some great mentors who gave me great advice, who worked with me, who helped me. And as I moved through my career, I took those notes with me, and I would like to think became a lot better, given everything that happened at TSN and every opportunity that I've been given since those years at Syracuse. So I think the confidence part, the well-roundedness of the education, the opportunities to, I worked for the Syracuse Post-Standard. I covered every single sport you can think of, from the AHL, college hockey, Colgate was right there, Cornell was right there. I was covering so many sports. And basically, if you could dream it, Syracuse could give you an opportunity to make it happen. And that was my biggest takeaway. And the thing that still drives me is I went back to Syracuse recently, and, they have this wall of, wall of excellence basically. And I'm on there. And I was like, holy man, it's crazy. And it's what still drives me is that I remember that first day and them saying, we demand the best. And that's why we try to bring in really good people. And, even though I was bad in the beginning, I always use that as fuel to try and get better.
No, that's awesome. And two things for that answer I really really like was this, number one, just the opportunities to get better through the reps and doing a bunch of different sports or news, whatever, right? Just to make sure you understand what it takes in order to get better. And then this whole concept of failing. And look, I mean, I feel like for young journalists, they may be hesitant to fail just because it's they may not be great, but it's so important in order to learn and get better. I mean, I know, for speaking from personal experience, the clips or the columns that I wrote a year or two ago are very different to what it is right now, or just the level of podcast interviews from episode 1 to this current episode are very different. So I think in order to evolve and to get better, you have to make those mistakes, and it's good that a place like Syracuse or other journalism programs provide that opportunity to get the reps, but also learn from your mistakes and have mentors that mentor you along the way in order to become a more polished journalist.
Yeah, and I love to read. I love to read biographies, and I've read a bunch of them in quarantine, if we want to call it that, whatever we want to call this phase of our lives. And it's funny, every great leader, every CEO, every person you're reading books about, you see all their failings. They're always like, this didn't work out for me. This didn't happen for me. I could have quit here. I could have been done here. I fell on my face here. I made this big mistake here. Anyone who has ever accomplished anything has fallen flat on their face, and they have completely messed up. They have made huge errors, and they have bounced back, because the only way to build resilience is to go through those hardships and to go through those hard times and keep showing up. And I've made plenty of embarrassing errors in my career. I've asked horrible questions. I have been, I've been uninformed on things I should have been better informed on. I have embarrassed myself, definitely. But those things, I mean, they're failures in and of themselves, but they're also just moments where you get to look back on and say, okay, well, guess what? I got through it. It happened, and it was, I was a little red-faced, and that sucked. But you move on from it, and you're stronger because of it. You know that the next time you hit a roadblock, you can move past it. And until you do that, you don't know that you can. And I always think with young journalists, especially, I always tell them, when they ask for advice, like, oh, well, this, what if it doesn't work out, or it's so hard, like there's no opportunity. And I'm like, what if you can though? Like, what if you were the person who can do it, if you just keep pushing? And if you stop, that's the end. That's the end of your story right there. But if you just keep going and you keep muscling through it, eventually you get through all the thicket in the forest, and eventually you find the clearing, right? So I always think that the failures are just sort of the thickets along the way, and if you just keep moving your way through, you usually have a good chance of getting where you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice, and especially now with like it's job and internship season right now for a lot of young journalists, and it can be discouraging at times where you send out 100 job applications and you may get 0, but I think with your advice, it's like maybe that 101st or that 205th application turns into the opportunity, because it just takes one person, Kristen. It takes one person to say, like, here's a kid. He works hard. He's intelligent, and he has these intangible skills that make him a really solid journalist that can get better, that can grow, and yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, just trying to muster through that adversity, which can be hard. It can be discouraging given the scarcity of opportunities in this industry. But again, just continuing to power through, it can make you a better journalist, just because you've gone through that, the thick and thin, through the fire to get to where you are now, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I don't think anyone who's ever succeeded at anything has gone through it. So if you quit, that's the end.
Yeah.
Right? That's the end of the story.
For sure. And before you get to TSN, you spent a year with the Chicago Wolves doing a bunch of different tasks. You also were a digital producer at USA Today. How were those experiences, and just, again, along your path, preparing you to just be a better journalist? And I guess with the Chicago Wolves, you're right there with an AHL team, and I'm sure that knowledge certainly helps right now in your current role at TSN, being in the hockey world still.
Yeah, I mean, the Wolves were were a terrific experience. I loved being sort of really hands-on with one team and to really be a part of that community feel. It's part of why I really wanted to get back into beat reporting after I was out in LA with USA Today, where it was very much on the sort of the web side more. There was hockey coverage, but it wasn't like a beat. I really liked working with the Wolves and having that interaction with just the one team, and you get to know the players, you get to know the organization, you understand the structure, you understand from one season to the next what's changed, what's stayed the same, how things have evolved for the group. And I really appreciated that chance. The Wolves let me really grow, I think, as a person and as a journalist. Even though I was technically working for a team, so like the journalist tag necessarily doesn't apply when you're doing the in-house stuff, but it did make me a better writer. I learned a lot also about graphic design and about I think the other side of PR and things like that, like things that go into really making a team run, and of course learning about the league itself. And so when opportunities came up early in my career at TSN to cover the Marlies. I didn't travel a lot my first couple years on the beat, so when the Leafs would be out of town, I would go to the Marlies. And it's funny because I knew a lot about the league, but then it was those early years spending a lot of time with the Marlies that the guys who were coming up through there, the Travis Dermotts and you look at Sheldon Keefe, like that's where I built those relationships. Was I was there, I was the only one there, and so Keith and I would talk for like 30 minutes after practice. It's two of us, and you build that relationship, and then you see how that it benefits you later on because you know the coach pretty well when things change. So those experiences were invaluable, and at the AHL level. And then USA Today was very what's the best way to describe it? It was so different than anything I had wanted to do. Certainly working the back end of a website, editing, doing tasks that maybe I wasn't really well versed in at the time of my hiring, but that I got pretty good at as it went on. It made me a better journalist, because reading good journalism all day, every day will make you better. It will make you a better writer. It will make you see the nuances of storytelling better. And then I did get a chance, obviously, to cover the Kings and the Ducks at the same time, but I was doing a lot of editing for the website as well. So that was, I think, my biggest takeaway from those years. And then doing a podcast with Kevin Allen and Jimmy Haskell while I was there was great. We got a lot of really cool guests on. I'd never done podcasts before. And that sort of got my name out there with like Sirius XM back in Canada. And so I was getting some opportunities there, and the NHL network started hearing that. So everything builds. Everything that you do, if you're building sort of your brand, so to speak, it really makes a difference. Every appearance, I think every aspect of what you're doing will probably play into your future career in some positive way.
So how do you then end up at TSN, essentially achieving, as you said earlier, your dream of covering hockey in Toronto?
Well, I applied, and they called me, and that was the beginning. I really didn't expect it. I was living in Chicago at the time. I didn't really think that they would really notice my application necessarily. I didn't have a ton of experience on a beat, obviously. An NHL beat. I had the various opportunities from LA and then Chicago and St. Louis, but not a ton of experience compared to the caliber of responses I assumed that they would be getting. But I had great conversations with my future bosses while I was actually covering the Western Conference playoffs. So that was back in 2016. And they wanted to fly me up to Toronto to kind of see what was going on, meet with more people. And so I flew up there. It was I actually had to work that night in Chicago. So I flew up first thing, did the tour, and then flew back to Chicago and worked that night. So that was, I'll never forget that day. It was like the most wild day of my life. But I left Toronto feeling like, if I don't get this, I'll just be heartbroken, because it felt like such a good interview. It felt like such a good fit. I felt like what I had to offer, they really wanted. And the best part of it was that I was just completely myself. I went into the room with everyone I was interviewing with and just spoke my truth and just said, this is the kind of reporter I am. This is what you're going to get from me. these are my weaknesses, and I actually said what my true weaknesses were, but I also said this is also how far I've come in that area. Like, I don't have a ton of experience on this, but I've done X, Y, and Z to improve, and I will continue to do so. And that, I think, is what helped separate me maybe from the group, was that I totally and freely admit I'm not ever going to be the most talented journalist in a room. I'm not the best writer. I'm not the best broadcaster, but I will work harder than anybody else in the room. I don't care who you are. You will not outwork me. And that's what I think has gotten me to the point that I am, is that you can't always be the most talented. It's just not possible. But you get to decide how hard you want to work. You get to decide how many sacrifices you want to make. I made a lot of sacrifices to get here. I know a lot of people who gave up along the way because the sacrifices were too much. It's too hard sometimes what you have to do. It's easier to do other things than this. And anyone who has ever accomplished anything worth doing, I think, can tell you that the sacrifices have to line up with where you're at. And there are certain things that I gave up, but in the end, I got where I wanted to go. And I think that work ethic always comes through for me, that I have never ever had a problem working hard. And that, I think, is what TSN probably recognized in me, was that they thought, okay, maybe she's not the most talented, but we will always be able to work with her to get where we need to go. And I think that's a good quality to have.
I think that concept of sacrifice is so important because, look, I mean, many people can sort of relate in the sports media world to that sacrifice because, look, I mean, you could be missing going out with your friends on a Friday night when you're covering a game, or you have to miss holiday time with family or friends because you're on assignment, and sometimes people don't understand that sacrifice, but if you're willing to make it, like, it just shows that you're willing to do what it takes in order to succeed. So I find that's also a connective theme in terms of the guests that I've interviewed on this podcast, is just being willing to do whatever it takes, being willing to say yes to opportunities in order to learn and get ahead in the industry.
Yeah, you have to be a self-starter, and you have to be able to see the bigger picture. You can't have everything, right? If you want a 9-to-5 job so that you're available on weekends and whenever people are sort of spending that downtime together, that's great. You will not find that in sports media, though, because sports happen when people who work 9-to-5s are available to watch them happen. So it's just, you have to be realistic about your goals, and you have to be realistic about what you're willing to adopt in terms of a lifestyle, because sports media is its own lifestyle. And if you have a partner in your life, they have to understand what the demands of it are. My friends whose weddings I've missed, whose bridal showers, baby showers, any number of events, you don't get to go because you can't take every Saturday off in the summer when everybody's getting married. It's just not going to happen. So I think it's important for any young journalist, especially, definitely set out what your goals are for yourself. Be realistic about what this industry asks of you, and if those sacrifices are too great, then maybe it's not something that you want to try to fit yourself into, if you know that there's certain things that are going to be very important to you, and that just might not be possible in any journalistic endeavor, because by nature the hours are not typical, as they say.
So you've been at TSN since 2016. How have you evolved as a journalist, and how maybe has your role evolved at TSN in terms of just the responsibilities that you have as a beat reporter for the Leafs?
I wouldn't say that my job has evolved just to become greater. I just do more now. I co-host the Leafs broadcast with Jim Taddy. I do more television on SportsCenter, and that's hockey. I've traveled more as the years have gone on. Masters and we have our popular Leafs 3 and 3 segments. So there's just more responsibilities. There's more opportunity to do, I think, the multifaceted things. Like, I do write, I do TV, I do radio, but I just do a lot more of it. There's a volume increase that has come. So I think that's the biggest change. And as a journalist, I'm just more confident in my voice. I think coming on this beat was very intimidating, in that there's a lot of people that have been doing it for a long time. there's not really a lot of new faces. I mean, I'm still the newest face on this beat, and I've been here now for 5 years. And the Lance Hornbys, Kevin McGrans, Chris Johnson's, even like these guys, they've been around for so long. And so there was definitely, I think I had to develop that confidence and learn the team, especially because they would be talking about, remember this game 5 years ago, remember this player from 10 years ago. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know about these guys. I don't know about these events that have led to this point. But now I have a much, I have, those 5 years of experience, and I know I came at a good time in the sense that they really transitioned into a whole different sort of regime as a team, the Leafs did. So a lot of what I was stepping into was separated from the past. It wasn't like you were coming into the Blackhawks run, midway, one cup in, and things were staying very much the same. I came in during a season of change, and it's only continued to change and evolve since then. So it was a good time to take on a new beat. But I think as a journalist, I know more of what works. I know what doesn't. I know what people want. I understand the fan base better in terms of what they want to consume in terms of content. And so all of those factors, I think, have really played into just making me, a more impactful journalist, and just more willing to take on, maybe stories or viewpoints that I might have shied away from a little bit more in the beginning.
You talk about just some of the voices that have always been there, and like Lance Horby, who actually was a podcast guest of mine for a few months back. And I'm just curious, Kristen, for you, just the importance of trying to stand out, because I feel like so many journalists that first get on a big market beat, there are all these voices, and it feels like you're in a sea of water, and there are all these fish, and it's hard to stand out. So I'm just curious how long it took you to really try to stand out through your voice and through your work.
Well, I wouldn't say that I ever really tried to stand out necessarily. I just wanted to deliver to TSN what I told them I would, which is that I would be myself, and I would try to bring my voice and my perspective, my humor, to what I was doing. Because when I looked at the Leafs beat at the time, I looked at people covering it, and everything was so serious. It was like people talked about the Leafs like people were living and dying on the Leafs result, and I just thought it's not. It's supposed to be fun, like it's hockey, right? And so I just tried from the start to have fun with it and poke fun, and to make jokes, and to kind of bring some levity to Twitter, especially. Using, I think Twitter is a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, but for me, I love it. I think the community on there, people get fired up, people are passionate, and I try to play into that passion as well by just being who I am, and understanding that there was, I think, a dearth of humor and lightness around the Leafs. Everything was doom and gloom, and oh, they haven't won, and they can never win, and this is terrible, that's terrible. And it's just not. It's hockey. It's fun. It's engaging. It's supposed to be a good time. I don't want to be that journalist who is constantly writing the those stories about the negative. I want to be positive.
I love that.
Not because just because there's just enough negativity. Sports doesn't have to be negative. I mean, there's, of course, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to point things out. You have to do your job. But I think you can choose to look at your role in sports through whichever lens you choose. And for me, it's that I always want to be unbiased. I want to be fair. I want to look at the whole picture, but I also don't want to throw the baby out with bathwater every other game. That was, I think, my biggest focus when I started in terms of almost standing out, was that I just didn't want the pendulum to swing every single game and be like, oh, they're the best. Oh, now they're terrible. Oh, look at how great this player is. Now he's awful. Just even keel. Just stay on it. Have fun with it every game. You can be in the midst of a 7-game losing streak. And sure, you have to write the stories about what's going wrong, but you can also point out the things that are going well. And that's what, to me, I just don't think that you always need to be stepping on the throat of whatever you're doing. I mean, it was the same when I was covering the Kings and the Ducks. Same when I was covering the Blackhawks and the Blues. There's definitely angles to take that are negative. There's angles to take that are overtly positive. I just tried to find the middle ground, to have my fun, but also be serious in terms of what really needs to be reported on at any given time. So I think once I was able to kind of establish that, It really just helped me kind of find my own voice. And so now I think when things need to be said, they can be said, but there's a lot of room, I think, to just have fun with it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much negative things you can find about the Leafs. I mean, they haven't won since 1967. I get reminded that every day by my parents. So it's certainly nothing new. But yeah, just the importance of just being positive and optimistic, especially in 2020, which has been a lot of negativity. I think is very important in sports media. Christian, I want to end the conversation. I mean, you talked about earlier about being initially discouraged because there weren't a lot of women voices in sports, and while there certainly have been an increase in more women voices, there's still so much more we need to do and need to grow in order to get even more women's voices in sports. I'm just curious how you see your role in your current role at TSN inspiring a future generation of younger women journalists who want to pursue this industry, because as you've said, it can be hard, it can be challenging, but we need those voices, we need those perspectives. So how do you use your platform in order to inspire that future generation?
Well, I hope that it starts by just being a part of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
that being in a prominent role in a prominent hockey market, in a country that doesn't have a lot of female hockey reporters in those sort of more major roles. I hope just having my voice out there and making a mark in that way, being a good reporter, and that's
Mm-hmm.
doing solid work. That's making sure that, I don't want to ever be the topic of conversation. I don't want anybody talking about me as like Kristen Shilton. I want people talking about the work that I do, the reporting that where I don't want it to be about me. And that's what I see from, I think, other maybe female journalists. It ends up somehow, sometimes through no fault of their own, sometimes they insert themselves into it, and it just becomes where suddenly you're a spokesperson for like all women, and I don't want that. I want to just be an example of a woman who can come in and do the job really well, and then that will open the door, I hope, for other women to see that, and to think, yes, I can do it. But my bigger hope is actually, I hope that men can see it,
Yeah.
and that it can normalize for them women sports reporters as
Mm-hmm.
not a novelty, but as just a normal part of reporting. And that's, to me, the bigger key. I used to think that it was inspiring women, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
as much. It is, but it's almost a greater task to have men see women talking about sports, writing about sports, have that be normal. Have it like, let's abolish the old boys club, and
Mm-hmm.
let's just have it be normal that men and women cover sports, and that they're equally good at it, that there's not an inherent advantage to covering sports just because you're male. I hope that that is what I can do. I hope that I have brokered conversations with a lot of men through my platforms, and we talk sports, like we have those conversations, and I hope that it in seeing me do it, that they'll realize that the next girl who's coming along, whether it's in baseball or basketball, wherever it is, they're like, oh no, that's totally, of course, why wouldn't there be a woman in that role? It shouldn't be weird or
No.
surprising that a woman is given the opportunity to cover a sport the same way that a man is. So I hope that I can help with that. I hope that through the coverage that I bring, through the attitude that I bring, I hope that I'm good enough at what I do to be that a part of that change, a part of where we stop seeing it as as tokenism in a
Yeah.
way, and just see it as a normal part of sports reporting, because I love all the voices that you can get. I love that depending on what team or what sporting event it is, you can pick from any number of outlets. You can choose, like, oh, I love, like, look at what Doris Burke does. I
Yeah.
mean, there's nobody better than Doris Burke,
Mm-hmm.
but who's the next Doris Burke? Who's going to be the next and the next and the next? And that's really what we need. And that's not just a female, that's a male too. Like, who's going to be the next person that everyone universally agrees on? You are so good at what you do. And I just hope that if I'm even the smallest part of any conversation about someone who helped to normalize women sports reporters, or who helped to inspire other girls to pursue this as a career path, I think that would be the greatest I think legacy I could ever leave in my career would just be to shift the conversation, and then to shift it away from the old boys club of sports and into a new era where it's just everyone, sports really are for everyone. And it's hokey and kind of corny to say it, but that's what I would love to see. I would love for sports media to be for everyone who throws their hat in the ring and does the work. That's what should define you.
No, that's amazing advice, and I really like just the point about how it isn't just inspiring women, it isn't just continuing those conversations. It's also, really breaking down what, as you say, the old boys club, and allowing men to change their perceptions, because unfortunately it still exists. But I think, if men could be allies, if they could be supportive of women in sports, I think we can continue to have more of those opportunities to have women voices in sports. Kristen, last question for you, and I always do this with all my guests. What would you say has been your most memorable moment on the Leafs beat throughout your career thus far?
Oh my goodness, most memorable moment. I've had a couple that stick out. The Centennial Classic, my first year, the overtime winner. That was a crazy environment. I loved that. I got to do the Sports Center report for that game, which was really cool. The Leafs did an outdoor practice in Minnesota a couple years ago, which it was just so fun. It just reminded me why I love hockey, why I love sports. I thought that it was just such a cool thing to be in the middle of downtown Minnesota, just freezing. Downtown Minneapolis, and just freezing. And watching these guys just play 3-on-3 on an outdoor rink, that was really cool. And there's been other time, like I think covering Western Conference Final was really cool. Just seeing kind of that the progression from the first round right up to the final was really cool. And I feel like I always, every city I've been to, even it was a terrible game for the Leafs, but even just that first experience in Vegas on New Year's Eve a couple years ago. So yeah, I have so many. I feel like every year I'm like, oh, this is the best, but it's just because I absolutely love this job and the opportunities that it has afforded me. So those would be the highlights for me though.
Kristen Shilton is a Toronto Maple Leafs beat reporter for TSN. Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on the Weesesports Chronicles podcast.